Well, thanks for being with us today on the Extra Point Podcast as we take the extra point to the movies. And few athletes in the history of sports have combined success and universal love like the late Yankees catcher Yogi Berra. 19 years in the big leagues, an 18-time All-Star, and a 10-time World Series champion who managed a pitching staff long before the days of baseball analytics through having his eyes and his ears open and doing it with a smile on his face. But until recently, there was no documentary about his life, wit, and wisdom. So his granddaughter, Lindsay Berra, teamed up with Sony Pictures to produce one that debuts in theaters on May 19th.
So I have to say it was not originally my vision. This full credit to Peter Sobolov, who is our producer. He was dragged, as he says, by his wife to go see the Mr. Rogers documentary in the summer of 2018. And he ended up loving it. And the following day, he was at the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center golf outing, and he saw my uncles, Tim and Dale. And he said, "How come there's no Mr. Rogers documentary, but about your dad?" And they said, "Well, we don't know. No one's ever made one." And he said, "Well, can I?" And Peter had produced a movie of Sean Mullins previously. Sean is the director of the documentary. And he introduced Sean to my dad and uncles. Sean is an Army veteran. He played rugby at West Point, so he's an athlete and he's a lovely human being. My uncles and my dad immediately loved him. And that was kind of how the ball got rolling. I met Sean a little bit after that and just started peppering him with emails and phone calls like, "You've got to interview Vince Scully, and you got to get Dr. Bobby Brown, and you've got to get Audrey Gagliola and Hector Lopez, and you don't know any of these people because you're a Hollywood person. So you need me. I'm going to help." And that was how I got involved.
Well, Joe Garagiola was a great friend out here in the desert, and he told Yogi stories constantly. And I just would sit there like a kid at a candy store. So tell me some Yogi stories. I love hearing them.
Just random Yogi stories. Oh my God,
what's your favorite Yogi story?
I mean, I don't know that I have a favorite Yogi story that's going to be like funny for people. Like the moments that I think of the most are, just being a kid and decorating the Christmas tree with him. And we used to make meatballs the day before Christmas and the day before Thanksgiving. I would like roll a million tiny little meatballs with him. He would burn all the hot dogs at our family barbecues. We used to play wiffle ball and touch football and croquet and all kinds of sports and games with him in the front yard. He used to come to all my winter sports, mostly my hockey games, because he was away most summers until I was in my mid-teens, really. But my memories of him, my favorite stories are grandpa stories, not really Yogi Berra stories.
What did you realize when you're rolling meatballs, just the impact that he had on the world?
No, not at all. And I always say that by the time I was old enough to understand that Grandpa Yogi was also Yogi Berra, he'd already been Grandpa Yogi for so long that the two didn't really meet and shake hands in my mind. And even today, I'm obviously old enough to understand that those are two separate people. But when I think about rolling meatballs, it's Grandpa Yogi. And when I talk about the guy with 10 World Series championships and 18 All-Star appearances and 3 MVP plaques, that's Yogi Berra.
Would the Yankees have won World Series without Yogi Berra in the lineup, do you think?
I think Grandpa was a major cog in that machine. I think the catcher, really drives the bus. And I think he was able to really get a lot out of those pitchers. And that's very evidenced by the perfect game in 1956. Don Larson was not supposed to pitch that day. He did not have his best stuff. And Grandpa got him through 9 perfect innings of baseball, by the pitches he called, the locations he asked for, and knowing the hitters. He really was like a baseball savant. Even later in his life, I remember one time he was already in an assisted living facility and the dementia was kind of bad. And someone had given my dad a pennant from like the 1959 All-Star game or something. And it was a National League pennant. So not hitters that Grandpa would see all the time. And it had the whole roster around the outside of the pennant. And Grandpa just started pointing to guys and saying, and couldn't remember what he had for lunch, but could remember this guy couldn't hit an outside curveball, throw this guy fastballs with 2 strikes, like went around the thing and said how to get everybody out and made a comment about each individual player. He had so much in his brain. He would have been like analytics dream.
Which is crazy because I think he made famous the phrase the catcher's gear is the tools of ignorance.
I
You've
don't think
always
he
heard
made that famous. Somebody else called the catcher's gear the tools of ignorance, and I think it was a very common misconception that Grandpa wasn't very smart, but he was, really very, very smart about the game of baseball.
But I remember having a book as a kid, The Wit and Wisdom of Yogi Berra, and the nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. It gets late early out there. Any of those good sayings when you were making meatballs? Were there any good family sayings there?
I don't know that I remember anything specific, but it was really just the way he spoke. He was really able to kind of cut through the crap, and it was very black and white, no shades of gray. It was just the way he saw the world. So it was always just kind of very blunt and direct. And he was always a great guy to go to for advice, because you'd be like wrestling all the different angles of a problem, like totally not able to see the forest for the trees. And Grandpa would just be like, oh, just do this. And you'd be like, oh my God, he's totally right. And it wasn't always a good thing, because the right thing to do is not always the easy thing to do. But you'd be like, shoot, that's what I have to do. This is 100% the path. But it was just the way he spoke, and they would come out so often that it's not like we were like writing them down. It was just kind of the way the words fell out of his mouth.
Did you ever get a chance to witness a conversation between him and Joe Garagiola?
Oh my God, so many times. I had Joe on the phone with Grandpa the night before he passed away. Those two were literally friends. Grandpa and Joe both. Joe used to say, there was never a day when I didn't know Yogi. They were literally friends for 90 straight years. And again, we had him on the phone with Grandpa the night before Grandpa passed away. It was really an incredible thing to see. And young Joe Garagiola and my dad are really good friends, and I'm good friends with Meredith and Megan and Natalie, the granddaughters. So that Berra Garagiola friendship marches on. It's great.
All right, so tell us about the film. What's the storyline here? Does it start? I mean, so much talent came out of St. Louis right there, and then look where it landed in the baseball world. What's the story here you're trying to tell?
So the premise of the documentary is really that all of the yogiisms and Grandpa's really big outsized personality at the end of the day kind of eclipsed his talents on the field. And for me, the point of the documentary is to remind people what a great baseball player Grandpa was, but then also to show that as great as he was on the baseball field, he was a better human being. And, folks keep saying, oh my God, you think he was really overlooked? And I keep giving this example. Last year, right before the Tribeca Film Festival, where we premiered the documentary, Yadier Molina, St. Louis Cardinal, one of Grandpa's favorite players in baseball. He loved Yadi. He watched so many Cardinals games. He was a big St. Louis sports fan his entire life. Go Billikens. But anyway, we watched so many Cardinals games. And Yadi gets his 1,000th RBI, and I'm scrolling through Twitter. I had written a cover story on Yadi when I was at ESPN Magazine, so I knew him. And I clicked on the story to read about the circumstances of Yadi's 1,000th RBI. And the headline is Yadier Molina joins elite company. And it's a composite photograph of Yadi, Pudge Rodriguez, and Johnny Bench, who are all catchers with 1,000 RBIs. But Grandpa has 1,430 RBIs, which is a record that will never, no way, no how on this planet be broken. And he literally wasn't in the picture. So the goal for me of the documentary is to figuratively put him back in the picture as one of the greatest catchers and one of the greatest players of all time.
What do you think he would say today about the new rules, specifically the pitch clock? Would he like it?
So I know that he used to get frustrated with how long pitchers and all the unvelcroing and velcroing of the batting gloves. So I don't think that he would object to the idea of the pitch clock so much as he would hate the bigger bases. Every time I see the somebody step on that big base, I can think of my grandfather going, "Oh God."
And tell us, so the film's done. Like, how can people see it? How can people connect with it and kind of take a preview of it with all the viewing options out there?
Sure. So the film opens in 100 theaters in the tri-state area and Los Angeles on May the 12th, and then opens in a bunch more cities, including Phoenix on May the 19th. And then they're adding more cities each week after that throughout May and June until they reach a full national release. This is Sony Pictures Classic distributing the film, and it is only in theaters for the foreseeable future. So if you want to see it, you got to go to the movies.
Do we get the answer to the question how he got his nickname?
You do. Do you want me to tell you?
Yeah. How about a little tease going ahead?
Yeah, so
It
I
was
always
Yogi
hate to
Berra,
tell
right?
the story actually because it's not. Yogi Berra was named after my grandfather. It has nothing to do with Yogi Berra. It is, yeah. So grandpa, when he was a kid playing baseball on the hill in St. Louis, so Yogi Berra was named after Grandpa Yogi. The that has nothing to do with his nickname. He got the nickname when he was a very young kid playing on the hill in St. Louis. He used to sit with his arms crossed and his legs crossed while he was waiting to bat. And a kid that he played Legion ball with had seen a movie in which people were doing yoga. I suspect it was Gunga Din because it won an Oscar at the time. And he said, "Hey, you look like one of those yogis," and it stuck. It's very not an
So
exciting.
Yogi Berra was doing yoga. I had no idea he was doing yoga. Was there any
He just
quotes
kind
from?
of he just sat with his arms crossed and his legs crossed, like he sat like a yogi. It wasn't like doing tree pose or anything.
All right, leave me with this. Give me a couple more teasers. What else are we going to find out in the film?
I think that the main point that I would love people to understand for the film is that you don't have to be a Yankee fan, you don't have to be a Met fan, you don't even have to be a baseball fan to enjoy this movie. Grandpa was a first-generation Italian immigrant. We can all identify with an immigrant story. He's a D-Day veteran, volunteered to fight in World War II and was a machine gunner on a rocket boat off of Omaha Beach. So many of us are veterans and know veterans. There was a beautiful 65-year love story with my Grammy Carmen. He was a wonderful father and grandfather. And there's just so many parts of his story that are just human elements that will resonate with absolutely anyone. So you really don't need to be a baseball fan to really love this film.
The Extra Point Podcast is a production of 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.